really good discussion. If we could, I think we'll move on to our second question. And we'll get our first response from Dr. Bailey. How is this crisis different from the recent recession? That is the recession that resulted from the financial crisis.
Okay, thank you, Logan. So I've described the current slowdown as a kind of the economics of a sudden stop. In the global financial crisis, it was instability that started in the financial sector, which essentially became a kind of credit crunch, which then spread throughout the real economy. In the case of the UK, the peak to trough led to a fall in GDP of about 6%. GDP, the broad measure of activity in the economy, about 6%, but that took over a year. What we've seen is, in the space of a few months, a similar or greater decline already. I mean, Germany 10%, the UK probably similar. There's forecasts that the US could contract by 30% in this particular quarter. Similarly, in terms of unemployment, in the global financial crisis, it took over 3 years for unemployment to peak at about 6%. We've seen something similar in a matter of weeks, and it's only going to get worse. So the profound nature of the shock, the intensity and the speed of it is, I think, unprecedented certainly since the 1930s. And there's an issue there of whether a recession becomes a depression, a deep, long-lasting downturn in the economy that's kind of interconnected through economies and difficult to escape from, with possible kind of scarring effects on the economy, what economists call hysteresis effects, long-run damage to the economy. The World Trade Organization, for example, has talked about a decline in trade of about 13%, and in a worst-case scenario, over 30%. That would be similar to what happened in the Great Depression. I think the other sort of difference with the global financial crisis are the scale of government interventions that we are seeing. So, not only things like quantitative easing from the Bank of England, the European Central Bank buying bonds, but also the Bank of England basically creating, in effect, an overdraft for it to buy bonds being issued by the British government. We've seen the government intervene with loans to businesses, or whether they really get to businesses, I think is going to be a big issue. And we've seen a whole series of different government interventions. And I do wonder whether this is kind of going to be a sort of a reset moment for us. We did talk about this during the global financial crisis as to whether we sort of rewire the economy and do things differently. We didn't really. So I think there's going to be questions about how the banking system functions. Is it getting support to the businesses that need it on the scale that we want? Who are the key workers in the economy? I think that some of the people really doing the hard work at the front line in social care, in health, in deliveries are often very low paid. We might reevaluate who's important in the economy. There are going to be issues about fairness and inequality and who gets impacted most by this. There's going to be discussion about the nature of a welfare system, I think. In Spain, for example, they're talking about whether there should be a universal basic income. Everybody's paid a basic salary. Those sorts of discussions will come back. And then sort of longer term, I think there are issues about, well, who bears the burden? Governments are going to be stacking up big debt throughout this process. Who's going to pay for it in the future? Will there be issues like maybe a wealth tax back on the agenda? Questions about the resilience of our economic system as well. And certainly in the case of the UK and I guess the US, we weren't very well prepared in terms of our economic system being able to produce the things that we want quickly, whether they're ventilators or protective equipment for nurses and doctors. So there's a broader question, I think, about how the market works. And I think some of these issues are going to come out because of the severity of the crisis and what a profound effect it's had.
Well, thank you very much. I'm wondering, Joe, do you have thoughts on this? And you're currently muted.
Okay. Yes, I concur that it's really, the scope and the speed with which we've entered into this is unprecedented. I mean, as one business owners shared with me in the prior recession, we kind of knew it was coming and we could plan for it. This thing we couldn't plan for and make the needed adjustments to our business operations. And so that was significant. I think, for us locally here in the St. Croix Valley, and I was, one chamber director shared with me is we did not go into the last recession very deep, and we actually came out of it a lot quicker, and with really only the construction sector being significantly impacted. This particular event has impacted our whole sector and has taken us in deeper. I think that one of the questions is going to be, from the standpoint of when we do come out, what are, excuse me, I apologize here for a second. I lost my train of thought. The impacts on some of our businesses, what will they look like when they come out? What will be the new norm? Will restaurants be the same again? If we are into this for 8 weeks, habits change. And instead of going to your favorite restaurant on Friday night, you're doing the order out from that restaurant. Will you revert back to going to the sit-down situation? There will be changes in the supply chains, in the distribution, and how you approach your customer. And there will be those sorts of adjustments happening to your products and services. And what's interesting is they happen in this case overnight. And so you have Main Street businesses who are adjusting their products and services almost overnight in order to be able to stay open, as opposed to, again, having in the prior recession, the opportunity to do a little more planning and put a little more thought into how they might cope with the situation.
All right, thank you, Joe. Lal, do you have a perspective?
Yes, I agree with my other panelists. I think that this crisis is different because of the magnitude of the people that have been affected and the sudden nature. A lot of people are out of workforce. For example, in US, more than, I think it's last week's report that more than 10 million people, they have filed for unemployment insurance. So small businesses are going to be affected significantly. And even the stimulus package is not going to help, many people. So the previous recessions, they were having different impact on regional economy or on workforce differently. But the magnitude as well as the sudden nature of this pandemic is going to have different impact. And everyone is going to be impacted one way or the other.
Well, initial claims for unemployment benefits for the last week, so the week ending April 4th, just came out, and it was 6.6 million, which was followed by the previous week at it looks like 6.9 million. It's been revised up slightly, which just dwarfs the maximum it's been in the history of that series. Before, I believe the maximum that we had seen was somewhere in the neighborhood of around 680,000, once peaking at around that level during the financial crisis, and then once in the fairly significant recession in the early 80s. And so this, I think, provides a strain not just to our the economy from the standpoint of a number of people out of work, but also from the institutions within the economy. Like, for example, if a system designed to handle about 300,000 applications every week is suddenly inundated with 6.6 million, you start to have just other practical issues. I wonder if we could take just a minute or two maybe to talk about some of the practical issues that are different about this recession than some of the others that we've seen in the past.
Logan, if I could step in and just add a couple of things here. One of the things here in the upper Midwest that is different in this recession as opposed to the last is the last recession, like I mentioned, we did not go in as soon, and we came out quicker, but the diversification and the ability to export an array of products here in the upper Midwest really insulated us to some degree from those impacts. And we don't have that level of protection this go around because of the nature of how this has hit us. It's interesting thought in that respect. So just wanted to add that little piece out there.
And Logan, if I can add, the oil prices also is kind of deteriorating the current situation, because in our state most of the revenue comes out of oil industry. So if you don't have revenue, how you are going to support or fund all the activities in the future years? So that is also a concern, because I have heard that in Texas, if the oil price is kind of $60 per barrel, then they can have sufficient revenue to take care of all the budget issues. But now it's 25 or below $25 per barrel. So the people in the budget, they are concerned that how we are going to have revenue to fund all the activities.
Yeah, just to follow up on your earlier comments, Logan, it's a similar situation in the UK. So I was hearing some figures on the television last night. Normally the UK government would expect maybe 50,000 calls in a day on the helpline regarding universal credit, which is a kind of key welfare payment. One day recently, there were over 2 million calls. And the queue to get to speak to somebody was over 160,000 long. So you've got a system that is completely overloaded. Equally, some of the support, really good-natured support that's being put in place by the government, I don't think it's necessarily hitting the target. The Chancellor's had to keep coming back with new offers to try and fill the gaps. They're trying to respond to things. But for example, earlier this month, there were figures saying that whilst there'd been loads of interest and requests from businesses for loans, only 1,000 had been made. So it's really small scale stuff actually getting through. So they're having to redesign the schemes to make more firms eligible, change the nature of the guarantees required, say that whereas initially they were saying, look, you've got to go through whatever the banks can come up with normally to see whether you're eligible for a loan. They've had to cut all through that because of the crisis engulfing many firms. So constantly having to rethink what it is that the state does to try and plug gaps.
The other part is really the scope of the need for the capacity to deliver some of these services and tools that we put out there. When we think about the Paycheck Protection Program that the Small Business Administration in the U.S. has been handed, the delivery system that is being delivered under, which is really, I think, from my perspective, having formerly worked there, is the ideal conduit. That system would typically, in the course of a year, process in the neighborhood 50 to 58,000 loans. And here, in the period of less than a week, we're getting, it's getting criticized for having only processed 178,000 in the first 4 days. And so we have systems that are not designed to accommodate this rapid change and ramp up or scale up, even though and the magnitude is so much greater than what was originally planned I know that this magnitude was not in the agency's surge capacity when they did their disaster preparedness plan.
Yeah, another thing, another constraint, in delivering services for the, I have heard yesterday in the news, some of the states for the unemployment insurance claims, they are still using COBOL framework, the COBOL language, and we don't have, that was developed in 60s and 70s, and we don't have many coders for that language to process that many claims. So how we are going to deliver? That's an issue with many states. Just to process the claims.
And I would suggest it's also an issue with a number of federal agencies too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Systems, and they're not integrated, they're not modernized.